Labor is considering a Senate inquiry into the federal police carrying out raids on journalists. This week we've seen a series of raids and investigations launched by the AFP on the Australian press. On Monday I reported about a leaked story of 6 asylum seeker boats headed here from Sri Lanka. The next day I revealed that because of that report, I'm now the subject of a Home Affairs investigation. On Tuesday, AFP officers really stepped things up. They barged into the home of News Corp political journalist Annika Smethurst. They combed every inch of her property for 7 hours. And then yesterday, the national broadcaster, the ABC, was targeted. The AFP was there for 9 hours inside the ABC HQ, trawling through emails and documents as they executed a search warrant. Both Scott Morrison and Peter Dutton revealed to me yesterday that they had no prior knowledge of these raids. I'm very happy to say that Annika Smethurst, the national political editor for News Corp, joins me from Canberra. Annika, good evening to you.
Good to be with you, Ben.
I think most people would just want to know, how are you?
I'm doing better today. Look, I'm pretty tough. I'm a political journalist and you've got to be, I think, to do this job. But I'm not going to lie, it was a very confronting experience and I've had to shed a few tears over the past 48 hours. I guess I've been quite overwhelmed by the whole experience. I've never been in trouble with the law in any way, so it definitely has taken a bit of a toll on me. I'm very tired. But look, there's been an overwhelming amount of support too, not just from journalists, but from friends and family and people right across Australia. So that is something, I guess, positive that has come about this.
Annika, I started off my conversation with John Lyons from the ABC last night asking the same question. Just for those who aren't aware of the initial report that was over a year ago, just summarise for us the story that's landed you in trouble.
It's interesting because that's actually one of the other good things that have come out of this week. It was a really important story and the fact that we're talking about it again, I think, is a really significant thing. I reported that there was a plan, there was a conversation happening, letters between the Home Affairs Department and also Defence about using the ASD, which is the Signals Directorate. They are meant to spy on, I guess, people overseas who could threaten Australians. They're not meant to spy on Australians. And there was a proposal that perhaps under certain circumstances that might change and that they would use their online spy powers to perhaps start to monitor what Australians were doing. I became aware of this and published a story about 14 months ago. And at the time, after it appeared, I was informed that the departments were not happy and that perhaps there would be an investigation. But I haven't heard anything for 14 months, and I was definitely not expecting 7 police officers to show up at my home on Tuesday.
When you were given those initial documents, and you would have seen at the top of the document, this is classified, top secret, that kind of thing, how did you weigh that up against the fact that clearly we have a right to know? If there's a conversation at the highest levels of government about spying on our emails without warrants, spying on our text messages without warrants, clearly I want to know about that. How did you weigh up the top secret element with the right to know?
Look, this is something journalists have to grapple with, and once I became aware that these conversations were happening at the highest levels, I knew that there was a risk in publishing it to a certain extent. Governments don't want us to know everything, and journalists are here, the fourth estate, I guess, to highlight what happens. And, you know, journalists cop a lot of slack in this country, and this is the work, I think, that, you know, is what journalism is about. And I believe there is a right to know. I think Australians have a right to know that a digital spy agency that is meant to defend us from foreign threats had actually decided or was considering using those powers to monitor people in Australia. I think that is a significant story. I stand by the story. And I guess that was the decision that was made last year to run the story, thinking it was in the public interest, and we stand by that.
It was a bloody good yarn, that's what it was, and there was a level of public interest in it that you don't often see with a lot of stories that come out of Canberra because it really affected people's lives. So let's fast forward, because they tell you at the time they're not happy. Did they ask you to reveal your source at the time when you first published over a year ago?
No, and I've been talking to a few journos today, and it's not unusual for the cops to pick up the phone and phone journalists and say, how did you find out this little bit of information, or who were you talking to? And then traditionally journalists say, I'm not going to tell you, and it sort of ends there. So I hadn't even been contacted for an interview. I would have cooperated as far as coming down and sitting there as they asked me these questions, or, you know, even if they did want to search my home, I guess if they had the warrant, I would have had to go through with it. But the element of surprise to showing up at my house with a warrant to search both my house and my car was just something I really didn't expect. And I did feel, whether it was their intention or not, very intimidated and very confronted by that.
OK, so Tuesday morning, and I don't want to pry too much on your own living circumstances or whatever, but so we can get a sense of it. I don't know whether you live alone or whether there's others who share the place, but I'm guessing you're there in the morning, you've had your Weet-Bix, you're getting ready to go off to work. Give me some sense of what happened next.
Yeah, I was home alone. You don't sort of look at the time now in hindsight, but it was before work. I was heading off to work around 9 o'clock, and I heard a knock at the door, and I thought, oh, that'll be a house cleaner, because that's who I was expecting to be on the other side of the door, so I didn't even sort of glance out the window to see who it might have been. Instead, it was 5 members of the Australian Federal Police. They identified themselves and asked to come in. I let them in, and then once they had a copy of the story and a warrant and told me what they were here for, so I quickly contacted my editors and got myself some legal representation. Then 2 more officers came once they realised I was home. They got special, I guess, forensic teams to do an online search, and that involved handing over my mobile phone, my iPad and my computer, so they could search that with a specialised team inside my house.
OK, outside the computer, what else were they looking at inside your house?
They went through everything. They said they were looking for anything to do with the story. So there was a list of things, and I guess you could tell they weren't journos because it was things like storyboards. And I've been a journo for more than 10 years, and I've never sat down and done storyboards for a story. It's a far more sort of ad hoc proposition, writing a story, especially with daily deadlines. So they were just looking for any notes I'd taken, anything around this story. They went through everything. They started in my bedroom, they went through my bedside drawers, under my bed, inside my bed, through all my clothes, the pockets in my clothes. As it's been well publicised, my underwear drawer, inside handbags, Christmas decorations, inside DVDs. I didn't even know I still owned a few DVDs. They went through page by page of every book I own, cookbooks, my sewing basket, behind picture frames. So, look, they were incredibly thorough, and they didn't leave with any physical evidence. They did see some things on my phone they thought might be of interest, which are now on a USB, and then there's going to be some consultation about that, but nothing was actually taken from my house.
All right, give us some idea of when they're going through your underwear drawer. I mean, you're a tough cookie, and you've used that expression yourself to describe yourself. You have to be doing your job. You're dealing with prime ministers and opposition leaders and treasurers and defence ministers and all these kind of people. You know, you've got to be tough doing what you're doing. But when you're looking at strangers, rifling through your underwear drawer and going through all of these intimate parts of your home, do you feel violated?
Absolutely. It was awful to watch. I got 2 legal representatives there, 2 lawyers came over, and one of them watched the physical search and took notes, and one of them sort of observed the online search. And that was I was in shock. I genuinely was. So they took a lot of notes, and I'm so thankful for them being there, because it was terribly confronting and just powerless. You know, I'm not hiding anything at my house. They were going through cards my grandma had sent me, but they're personal, and there's something that, you know, I treasure, and the idea that other people were looking at it as sort of polite as the officers were, and they had obviously been sent to do a job. It is an awful thing when you have a sanctuary of your home, especially when you have a bit of a public life, and I work in Parliament House, and as you say, you know, I'm quite stoic, and there's a rough and tumble that happens here, and it is a sanctuary, being in your own home and having your own things and that privacy, and it was just taken away.
What happened after they left? What did you do?
I shed a tear. No, look, I had a few meetings with my lawyers that evening, and then by the time
you had a cry after
out,
they left, which means
it
obviously
it
did something to you. I mean, you're not a robot, Annika. You're a human being, and you've just had these people going through all your stuff. You had a tear up.
I did, because I stayed strong the whole time. I was very stoic, and I wasn't going to let them see that they had rattled me. There was also, you know, the tide was turned on me. There was press on my lawn, which I'm usually the one doing the stakeout. And, you know, I wasn't so worried for me, but my neighbours and everybody else, it was, you know, just seeing my house on the news all this week has been really, really rough. And I've been trying to avoid sort of reading the media since then. People keep sending me things. But I'm trying to just, you know, get some normality back. It was very, very overwhelming experience.
Let me ask you this. Why is it important that people understand the job that we do as journalists and the fact that there are going to be people who are going to give you information and you're not going to want to give up the identity of that person? And when you do have raids like this on the ABC and also on News Corp, what does that do to freedom of the press?
I think Australians should be really concerned about this, and I think there's often a misunderstanding about the way journalists operate. I know there's been a few people out there amid a massive support saying that, you know, no, we should wait until governments tell us what to write, and if they were going to make those changes, they inevitably would have had to announce them, and that is when we, I guess, report on them. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be in. We live in a free and fair democracy, and part of that, and a really important part of that, is having a fourth estate, having a strong and robust media to call people out when we see wrongdoing. And it works. It's a system that's worked and it should be celebrated. We're incredibly lucky to have it. I think the big fear that if these sort of tactics continue, as we saw with me, with you being investigated too, and of course the ABC, is not that journalists won't be, you know, strong. It has made me have a slight consideration as should I continue doing this job, but don't worry, I will. But it does rattle you. But it's more about the whistleblowers. It's about people in the public service who do see wrongdoing and might not want to speak up, even though, you know, they believe that what's going on isn't in the public interest, isn't, you know, in the interest of Australians. And I fear that if this sort of behaviour continues and this sort of, you know, raids and intimidation, that people will not come forward and stand up for what they think is right.
There's no doubt about that. We admire your strength and keep writing those stories because we want to read them, and that's the whole point. There is a strong public interest in these stories that you're writing. Now, just before I let you go, I know that it was a full-on thing to go through, but in moments like that, and John Lyons touched on this yesterday, when you're in a situation like that, it's uncharted territory, it's strange, there's always going to be some bizarre things that happen. What happened when you're sitting in your place and these guys are going through your stuff? There are a few lighter moments you were telling me today.
Well, you start talking to them because they were polite and they were doing their jobs. So they were going through cookbooks. One of the coppers told me his wife had the same one. We were talking about recipes. At the same time, you know, the interest rates were dropped, so that was discussed, what footy teams we go for. And then you think, these people are looking through my stuff. Like, why am I being nice to them? But, you know, manners ultimately prevail. So, you know, we kept the small talk going despite the circumstances.
There you go. All right, you might even get a story out of them sometime. Listen, Annika, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us on Sky, and we'll be reading all about it for some time to come, and we admire what you do, so keep on doing it.
I appreciate it, and good luck to you too, Ben.
Good on you. Thank you so much. Annika Smethurst from News Corp. She's had a big week.